Hello and welcome to the first episode of 2020 of the 21st Century Work-Life podcast. And as we're entering the new year, I thought we'd cover the experience of new employees onto remote teams and organizations. We usually refer to this as onboarding, but I much prefer the term that Mark Kilby, one of our guests today, uses for the process, which is integration. And Mark and I will talk about why we prefer that term during our conversation, but I just wanted to place that here for now. Now, because I'm actually recording mid-December, I'm going to skip the what's going on section, so how about we start the episode now? Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about how the world of work and our attitudes to work are changing. This show is brought to you by Virtual Not Distant, a London-based company where we help teams and organizations transition to an office-optional approach. To have a look at what we do and the show notes to our podcast episodes, head over to virtualnotdistant.com. Thank you for spending your time with us. Well, hello. If we haven't met before, my name is indeed Pilar Orti. If you're a regular listener, welcome back again. So a little bit of trivia for today. All three contributors in today's episode, well, their names start with the letters M-A. And all three have been involved with the show more than once already. So in order of appearance, we're going to be hearing from Marcus Vermouth, Mandy Garner, and Mark Kilby, and they all work for distributed companies. And I'll introduce them each as we get to their particular contribution, and I'm going to be adding some other bits that I've picked up here and there about the subject. So how about we start at the very beginning? When we think about welcoming someone into the team, about integrating them into the organization or guiding them through our processes and people, it might help to put ourselves in their place. So let's start this episode with Marcus Vermouth, who's now an engineering manager for the mobile team at Buffer. And he told me all about his first day at his new job. And he actually starts his story even before then, the minute he received the email saying that he'd got the job.
Yeah, when I received the email, I was, of course, very, very happy. And normally it takes some time, right? You still have your old job. You need to get out of that and then, maybe take a little break. But for me, I was a freelancer and I was very excited to get it. So as soon as I got the email, I wrote back that, I can start immediately. But then we had like 2 days, I think, that were in between. And basically, as Buffer is a fully remote company, it was a day like any other. Like, I'm not going anywhere else, but physically everything was the same because I went into my office, turned on my computer, and then there was at the new job. So physically, there was basically not a lot of difference there, which is, of course, awkward, but that's how remote work is when you start a new job. There's no, first day you're going to be in the office and we're going to show you around. There is no office, so you can't do that.
And do you have, because that's an interesting thing I hadn't thought of, which is, as the person working, there might not be, unless we do it very deliberately, there might not be that big change that sometimes helps us to get into a different headspace. So you were freelancer, you weren't coming from another job, but that's interesting that, of course, we're still physically in the same place. It's just we've changed.
Yeah.
So, I don't know anything to say about that or not really.
I think it helps when you come from a different job to have like a small little break in between, whether that's a week or so. For me, as I was a freelancer, and this was basically continuing that in kind of the spirit of just, doing my work, I didn't need it. I don't know if there's a problem around that, if we need a different headspace. I can see that a small little break in between is definitely helpful. But for me, it was just business as usual.
Yes. Good. All right. So you said, hey, I'm ready now. Let's go. And what happened next?
So I got, I think after the offer email, I also got another email at that time explaining like, hey, okay, this is your start date. Here's the things you need. Then I got access to my Buffer email account where already a couple of invites were waiting for the different tools we were using. And of course, I got itchy and I started to look a little bit and went in. And then the first day when I came on, my team at that time where I joined was only 2 people. There was one iOS developer, one Android developer. So they were all in the US. So it's like, okay, what do I do now? And at that time we had a 45-day bootcamp period, and we had a buddy system which consisted out of 3 buddies, I think. Basically, buddies are people that help you getting along in different areas. So there's a role buddy that helps you with your role. There's a culture buddy that helps with culture. That time there was still a lead buddy that was kind of the person responsible for everything going well. And the bootcamp period meant that for 45 days, both Buffer and me were looking if this is a good fit. So I could decide, maybe not, or Buffer could decide, yeah, maybe it didn't work out, which felt a bit awkward because it's like, oh God, I'm on trial now. But as I said, I think the freelance thing helped me here because I was just jumping online and, okay, there's another client in that sense, right? Yeah. So I was just chugging along. And the first day was especially awkward, as I said, because most of the team was East and West Coast US. And I had luckily some time zone buddies that were in the UK that could help me out immediately when I joined, especially just looking around. So the first day was just looking around a little bit, and we had some basic structure of like what I had to do, but it was very basic, I would say. Like Buffer at that time was maybe 40 people, so we're still smaller than we're now, like half the size. I think, yeah, that was what it was the first day. I was very excited. I jumped on, and oh yeah, and on the first day in the evening, there was also an all hands, which being new to a company, wow. Of course, there was just 40 people. It's not like 90 how we are now, but still coming online, working for a fully remote company. And the first day there's an all hands where you see 40 people, the CEO, and everyone speak. It's like, oh God, where did I end up here? So it was a very exciting day.
Have you been to some of those meetings before in other jobs online?
No, that was for me the biggest online meeting I had in that time. Yeah, the meetings before were maybe 4 or 5 people or in-person meetings then.
Even that is quite... were you prepared for that? Did anyone warn you or...
Well, they told me it's going to happen, but I didn't know what to expect. So, of course, it was exciting because I was so excited. I wanted to meet everyone. And that was also a goal of mine because we were still small. I had actually in my calendar at that time, I kind of journaled it and tried to meet everyone. So I think in the first 3-4 weeks, that's how long my bootcamp lasted because we ended it early because we thought it was working out well. I got to meet everyone. So I made a generous effort to kind of reach out to everyone and say hi. So I got to know them, which now is very tricky with 90 people, but 40 people was still doable for me. So that was kind of a big goal of mine to at least say hi to everyone. So I was very eager. The all hands was fine. I was excited. I wanted to meet the people I'm going to work with.
How did you say hi to them, all 40?
Well, at that time, I think we used still HipChat,
right?
Pre-Slack. So very sounds like it's a long time ago, but it's not. I just reached out and said like, hey, Marcus. And of course they see you when you join, like there's a big announcement in like the general channel saying, hi, here's Marcus, a lot of gifts and a lot of, you know how it is when you go into an office. So you have to replicate that. So when you come online, either your lead buddy or now your manager writes a message, hey, it's Marcus joining in, da-da-da. And then a lot of people like either send gifts or emojis and it's like a party going on. So that's always fun. And they know that you're there. And then when you reach out, you can say, hey, just wanted to say hi, maybe chat for like 15 minutes and learn a bit more about each other. And yeah, I think at that time it was very, very casual and it all worked out and I got to meet a lot of people.
What happened over the next days? How did you get on and how did you navigate, of course, all those tools that you were so curious about at the beginning?
Yeah, at the beginning it was, I don't think we used a lot, but mostly like the Google Suite. We used Hackpad at that time for notes. And there were some basic guidelines I could work through, like explaining to me what was what. It's not as good as we have right now, like onboarding templates and all of that, but we had some checklists to work through. So I had that to kind of navigate a little bit through the tools and throughout all the information. And then I, of course, had the buddies, which didn't work out all the time, but we set up like weekly chats, at least with some of them, to understand more like what I should do and what the culture is like. How do I expense things? How does that work? So the buddy system helped a lot in guiding me along there. Also knowing a lot of people. I think the first week or the first maybe few days was basically just reading a lot, getting an understanding. The good thing was I knew a lot of Buffer. That's what I hear almost about everyone that joins Buffer. It's like we share so much on our blog, and almost everyone who applies reads a lot of that because that's how we find Buffer. So you kind of feel that you know Buffer a little bit when you join. So it's also a good culture fit then, because you already fit in, you know everything around, you get to connect with people, you're on the same wavelength. So that helped a lot, that feeling of like, oh yeah, I know a little bit about this. And as a developer, then I think in the first week I already shipped some code changes and worked on some things there. But of course, it took me a little moment to kind of get adjusted to all of this.
And I think it's something that not all that more companies could make use of, which is all that sharing of information of what's going on, not just as communications, but actually as part of the hiring process and as part of, as you're saying, the onboarding process. There's so much value in that sharing, how the company works. Like some, not just sharing, but really something that does reflect how it really is to work there.
Yes and no.
Okay.
Like I'm a big fan of the transparency. That's like I always want to have that. But you have to remember, we had internally, transparency was all over the place. We had transparent emails. So my first day when I joined, I had an inbox full of 50 or 60 emails. I was like, oh wow, what's going on here? And getting used to having a full inbox every day, like until you realize, okay, I have to set up filters. We had an internal tool we could use to kind of set up all of that, but it can also be kind of overwhelming a little bit.
So I think that's also maybe part of the onboarding experience, whether it's formalized or not, is getting used to how it works here, because it's not just what tools are we using, but actually even you're saying email into your, you had one of your shocks was with the email with the inbox. That's not even a new tool.
Yeah, no, it isn't.
Well, that's fascinating. Before we carry on, I just want to pick up on the roles of the buddies. Is that still something that's happening?
Yes, although we just have two now, because at that time we didn't have managers, so the lead buddy is now kind of the manager, to make sense. We still have the role buddy and the culture buddy. And I always explain it like this. Let's imagine you go to a networking event or to a conference, and you go alone and you don't know anyone. And you go in, and at least me as an introvert, I stand on the side, I drink my coffee, and I look on my phone, and maybe if someone reaches out to me, I say hi, right? So network events are generally pretty, if you're not an extrovert, they're a little bit awkward. But now going to a conference, and I just had that on Friday, or going to a networking event with a friend, you immediately have someone like a wing woman or wingman that helps you. You can chat to them, and immediately you're not the only one standing in the corner talking to your phone, right? So that's how I explain the buddy system, in the sense that you come into a new company of between 40 and automatic, 1,000 people, you don't know anyone. But from the first day on, you have those two buddies. And those two buddies are the people you get to know immediately. They'll help you. They show you around, and you have someone to talk to, right? That's how I explain it. That's how it helps too, in the sense that they help you show around. So the role buddy, as the name says, is someone who is in a similar role than yours. So if you join as an engineer, especially like an iOS engineer, you probably have someone that is an iOS engineer. If you join as a customer support person, someone likely will be customer support person as a role buddy. They will help you to understand your role. If you have any questions, what you should do. In general, most of that is work related. And then the culture buddy is someone who has a good understanding of the culture, who is kind of also an advocate for the culture, and can talk about it, can help you understand, and nowadays also can give you feedback on like what's right to do, what's not right to do. So they're kind of promoting and advocating for the culture at Buffer. And how they get to be chosen is, the role buddy is pretty easy. It's either someone on your team that has the same role, or if not possible, someone on another team but still same role. And the culture buddies, I think a while back we kind of asked a couple of people if they wanted to, and collected them all in a group, and they have sometimes maybe even a training call to see like, hey, how you can give feedback to a new hire from like the culture side of things. So it's not everyone, but most of it is based on a volunteering basis.
And the role of the culture buddy, that's an interesting one because, of course, if we want to sustain a specific kind of culture, that's an excellent way of doing it. Where is the space then to make sure that the culture in the company evolves if it needs to, or that slightly changes if it needs to, instead of always, we're making sure that everyone absolutely fits?
Oh, we have in our values improvement or practicing reflection and improving consistently. So buffer, like the culture buddy it's not a policewoman or policeman. They're not like policing you in the sense that tapping on your fingers when you did something wrong. There's some core things that your company will always do, like your values. They will always kind of stay the same and evolve in a slower way. Like they're always quite similar and they evolve, like, let's say, in years, not in months. So that's kind of the core that they are like advocating for. That's why I use advocating and not policing.
I suppose it's quite nice also as a nice person, fresh pair of eyes, come in here, see something and go, ooh, I am not sure about this. It's easier to have someone whose role is actually to have those conversations with you rather than think, right, who do I talk to about this now?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, that works both ways.
Yeah, lovely. So my next question then is around your own role onboarding someone. And I can't remember how your team or how your role has evolved over the past couple of years, but have you had to onboard someone, Marcus?
I was involved in one complete hire while I was in my own team while I was engineering manager, and let's say a second developer because he joined roughly around the time when I became manager. So I was involved in that too. And in addition to that, I also was involved to hire other roles and other teams, especially like other managers I was involved in. I've been a buddy on both sides, culture and role buddy. So been involved in a little bit there.
What is your experience of onboarding someone online, someone who you're not in the office with?
So when I think about the hiring part of course, as a manager, I'm thinking more about like the interviewing stuff because our people team helps a lot with the onboarding. So if I'm the hiring manager, of course I'm involved, but the people team helps us with, we have like now a template that we can work through. Well, I think the first 15 days are very detailed. So there's a section for every day, which like first day, read this document, get your emails set up, reach out to your buddies. Second day is then a different topic around a different theme. Third day is about transparency. Fourth day is about our values, on. And you have kind of a checklist you can check off. So that's already prepared and that's there. Me as the manager, I'm more focused on setting something up like a 30, 60, 90 goal, like more work oriented. What are your expectations when you join this new team? Because as we know, remote work, we don't see everyone. We don't know what to do sometimes, especially when we join. So setting the expectations for me as the manager are very important. And that's why there's this one template for like the general buffer things. And then there's a document for your role things where I write down all the expectations from you in like this first period of like what do we want you to do in those 30, 60, and 90 days. Then, especially as a manager, it's very important to just start immediately with building a rapport, building a relationship with that person, right? So reaching out and the first couple of one-on-ones, just chatting about life, just chatting about how they found their way, what excites them, building this shared understanding of each other, and not just asking, but also sharing that they understand, okay, that's how I work as a manager. I'm very open, I'm very honest. Whenever you want to chat, we're going to chat. Like there's nothing you need to hide here and stuff like that. So for me, it was very important in that onboarding phase to build a good relationship.
So you're onboarding into the organization, they're being onboarded onto the team, and they're being almost onboarding into the relationships also.
Yeah. What do you mean by onboarded into the relationships?
Well, if you, because we behave differently, like you're saying. So I'm thinking what I'm seeing is a very deliberate way of helping, not only of you as the manager getting to know the person and very deliberately making space for those conversations. you're also role modeling how you are as a manager. Those first days are very important. So it's almost, in my mind, it's almost like that relationship building is also very deliberate. It's also, it's got lots of weight in those few weeks or whatever.
Yeah, and I always say that when we talk about co-located offices and remote work, everything is almost the same, like work is work, whether that's remote or co-located. But in remote work, almost everything has to become more deliberate or more intentional, right? So the relationship building in an office maybe just happens because you have a coffee together, or you meet at the water cooler, or you sit next to each other. But in remote work, you have to make an effort. You have to make an effort to do those things that in the office are normally just, it happens.
Nice. And I was thinking when you were talking about the first 15 days, how structured they are. Because the first few days are always so lost. And if on top of that, you're not getting any visual cues about who's in the company, what's around me or anything, to just have that structure. So it's very easy to just get your head around, exactly what you need to be doing. So again, I think that's probably even more important for someone who's being onboarded onto a remote team, that there is that structure so you're not feeling lost at any point.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, it's also a loose structure. It looks very structured, but if you don't check one thing off, nobody is going to, again, police you. It's just a guideline, which exactly as you said, helps in the first 15 days. And I think that's when you start to get the groove.
Yeah, exactly. Anything else around onboarding?
The biggest thing I always mention about the onboarding part is our buddy system, whether that's 2, 1, or 3, having that one person, especially in a remote team, when you join, is kind of, crucial. I couldn't do without it, I think. And no one, I think, and Buffer could without it, because it's really, really been helpful.
So, listeners, as you've seen, Marcus reflects a lot on his work and practice, and that's why he's such a regular guest on the show. You can listen to him in episodes 188, 195, 209, where he talks about his own journey as a manager in a remote organization. I recommend that you check out his website because he's got loads of articles there, marcusvermuth.com, and you will find his Twitter username in the show notes. And I wanted to expand on what Marcus talked about the two buddies, the role buddy and the culture buddy, which reflect the different areas of organizational life that I suppose new employees need to be exposed to and integrated into. So I used to be subscribed to the HBR Management Tip of the Day app. And back in July, I was already thinking about this episode then, I saw this tip on the 3 types of information your new hires need. And it mentioned that what the person needs to learn falls into 3 categories. So I'm going to quote directly now. Technical learning is the company's products, customers, technologies, and systems. Cultural learning includes attitudes, behavioral norms, and values. And political learning is how decisions are made, who has the power to make them, and whose support the new hire will need. And so the role of the manager is to, I quote, help the new employee pick all of this up by connecting them to the right people. For each category of information, think about who has the relevant expertise and communication skills to explain the essentials. Now, I don't always agree with what the app says. I thought this was a brilliant piece of advice, and it links to and amplifies and continues some of what Marcus was saying. So it's important to remember that this bit of advice wasn't directed at distributed organizations as such, but hey, it starts to be very similar. And when you think about it, this aspect of culture, pretty much as Marcus mentioned, and that aspect of, and I wish we had a better term, of political learning, are even more important in the distributed space, because as new people into an organization or even into a team, it's going to take us ages to figure that out, to figure out what the norms are, to figure out how things are done here, who are the people who hold the information, who are the connectors in the organization, who are the innovators, the change agents. So from the wording, from what he says, especially around political learning, I imagine the author is talking about more traditional hierarchical ways of working, that what we are hear about on this show. But regardless of the flatness of an organization, it's always worth knowing who to talk to when you need X or Y, or when you want to find out about this or that. So thinking from a remote work point of view, we also need to know which communication channels are best for interacting with some people. This is also information that for a new person, it's very valuable. Or actually, where are certain discussions being found? So sometimes there is a handbook that explains this very well, but a lot of the time these things just happen organically. So I think those are also points of onboarding or of integration that I think it's worth considering. Now, listeners, I would very much welcome your thoughts on this, and it might even be an interesting exercise to go through. How do you help new people in your team or organization to start to get a picture of how your organization works? So beyond the practicalities of their own day-to-day and their own jobs, which this is usually quite clear. There's usually a very clear process of getting people onboarded onto that. How do you help people understand your company's norms and quirks? Listeners, I would love to hear from you. As you see, if you listen to the last episode of 2019, you probably remember I love getting contributions from listeners. This is our show. I'd love to hear from you, and I'm sure other listeners will be interested too. So virtualnotdistant.com is the website where you can send us a message through the form, or you can email me directly, Pilar, Pilar, at virtualnotdistant.com. If you're emailing me, tell me that this is where you heard my email address, because people work it out and they send you stuff that you're not interested in. All right, so our next contributor, Mandy Garner, is the managing editor at Working Mums and Working Wise. And actually, I hadn't planned when I was planning this episode, she wasn't on my contributor list, but when we were recording for episode 212, which was on remote for social change, she started talking about how her team operated. And remembering that her organization is also remote, I asked her about how they bring people into the organization. And having listened to Marcus explain how he, as a newcomer, put together all those first conversations, I really enjoyed listening almost the reverse approach at Working Mums.
Once they have been recruited, we get a kind of calendar that's sent to us, and everybody slots in at some point in the calendar. They'll have about half an hour with each person, at least half an hour with each member of the team, just sort of going through just sort of, general welcome and all that kind of stuff, and just getting to know you kind of thing, but also explaining what we all do and how they can potentially feed into that. So, for example, sales can sort of feed in to editorial if they're having conversations with employers, and employers might mention that they have a new initiative or something, that's really interesting coming up, or an event or what have you, and they feed that back to me. So it's really important that we all link up. And then there's quite an extensive sort of, I think it's like a 1 to 2 week sort of onboarding program where they get to grips with all the systems and all that kind of thing as well. And then we will all meet up either at some of the round tables that we organise, or other events that we organise. And then it's really good because you've often had a sort of quite lively discussion or chatting about background and all that kind of stuff, and children, and if they've got children, that kind of thing. And then you meet up with them and they look entirely different to what you imagined. Exciting.
Even if you've seen them on video, they're always taller, shorter, it's really interesting.
But the communications is absolutely key. I'm sure that my director would say that, it's absolutely key getting that right from the start so that everybody knows what everybody else is doing. There's a kind of schedule that shows what kind of patterns each person does. So, for example, our marketing managers is a job share, and then there's other marketing assistants below them, and some of them work part-time. There's various different sort of work patterns that people do. I tend to work across the week. I work part-time because I do another job, but I'm always around.
Yes. Well, that's quite a modern thing to onboard people onto, people's working patterns. And of course, in your company, it's all about enabling that flexibility. So really key to have that. And sometimes it's missed, though.
Yes, it is, I think. And also, I think I'm really sort of keen on the remote working side of things. There's people who've been doing it for years and years and years. And there's a lot of employers who they say, oh, yes, you can work from home 2 days a week or whatever. But there's no structures or support. You're basically left to, make it work yourself, particularly around technology, which always gets me very problems. But I think that there's a lot of expertise around of those people who have been doing it for years and years and years, who have, to some extent, felt sidelined, felt that they've got to sort of, make it work themselves. But they are a very good pool of knowledge, and people should draw on it.
And listeners, you can hear Mandy talking about her own work at Working Moms in episode 74. And in the more recent episode, 212, she talks about how flexible working is enabling social change with remote work as part of that bigger picture. So she talks about how it's enabling social change, although not as fast as we would like it to. But anyway, check out Working Moms and Working Wise, the websites, and also we'll put the link to her Twitter handle in the show notes. And I'm also going to pick up on the point she made about people making it work remotely without having their structure in the team or their organization. Because this is something I come across often, either in workshops or in casual conversations with some of my friends whose job doesn't have anything to do with advocating for a flexible approach to work. And this is the fact that actually we're used to people working every now and then from home. And some people have made it work quite regularly, regardless of whether their organization was enabling it. And this means that it's very difficult to make what sometimes is a small shift between how we used to do it and how we can do it now. So I'm not saying that the way we do it now with better use of technology is better, but my concern is that sometimes it's not being taken as a serious option. And if you want to hear more on this, have a listen to my conversation with Eva Rimbau-Gilabert in episode 214, where she talks about how she thinks this is slowing down the adoption of remote work in Spain, although you can apply it to almost any country, I think. And this is also important to remember that just because our new hire has worked remotely before, they might not have worked in the way that we work. So this is something, of course, that is part of the recruitment process. And as we've heard Marcus, and as we will hear Mark say in a second in his contribution, the interview process is already part of the onboarding process. But I think it's really important to remember that as more and more organizations adopt some kind of remote work setup, to remember that the new person might never have worked in the way we work. So that's the relevance to this episode. Now, before we move on to a third contributor, I would like to add a very 21st century addition to the onboarding process, and this is the bot. Now, Maya and I talked a little bit about this in episode 213 when we were talking about artificial intelligence as a new member. So I just want to add something else. And I came across this example in the book published by the Kronos Corporation, which is the book is titled Being Present, A Practical Guide for Transforming the Employee Experience of Your Frontline Workforce. And I came across this, somebody wanted to place one of the editor of the book on the podcast. So I got introduced to this. I still need to bring that person on. But anyway, in this book, one of the authors, this is chapters written by different people, one of the authors explains how at our loop, where they design ways for people to be transported really, really fast, they use bots during the onboarding process to answer the easy questions, so that the people in charge of onboarding, like those on human resources, can actually have time to tackle the more complex questions and situations. So this was just mentioned in brief in an episode on onboarding. So I dug a little deeper. Well, I did a Google search, and I found an interview with Our Loop's co-founder, Brent Lessard, where he says, and I quote, and we'll stick the link in the show notes to the article, he says, "We began using Tala, which is the bot." This is on Tala's website. "We began using the bot as a trial to simplify much of the onboarding process and to separate aspects that didn't require human involvement. It didn't take long for us to roll it out across the board with a measurable increase in new user engagement and decreased the need for human intervention. We were also able to track the progress of individuals through onboarding to see where improvements could be made, as well as to receive feedback immediately at the conclusion, which helped identify optimization points. We could also tailor the experience to a new user based on their identified goals and motivations, such that Tala, the AI, would direct them towards appropriate teams and provide new users a familiar culture within our organization." So listeners, what do you think? Will bots be our own buddies of the future? Answers to virtualnotdistant.com. Right, well, I've had many conversations with our next contributor, both on this show and in many other occasions. Sometimes we've even just met up to catch up. So I met Mark Kilby through Virtual Team Talk about 4 years ago, and he's another example that you can develop meaningful relationships with people online. I consider him a colleague and a friend, even though we've not worked together, but we've had so many work-related conversations that it feels like we have worked together. Not that talking to Mark is hard work. So let me introduce him to you properly in case you haven't met him before. Mark Kilby, he's an Agile coach consulting with many organizations, and he's also the co-author of From Chaos to Successful Distributed Agile Teams, which I recommend. And in our conversation in this episode, as I mentioned right at the beginning, he refers to the onboarding process as integration. And also a bit like what we talked about with Marcus, he highlights how it actually all starts with hiring. With Mark, we also talk about the importance of language, the role of the team, and we also, very interestingly, the conversation ended with how integration is an ongoing process in an organization like some of the ones he works with, when new teams get put together all the time. So that's important to understand, and also how that's a process of continuous onboarding into teams, not just organizations. And he talked about how this process of continuous integration can become an organizational muscle. So again, I love the vocabulary in this conversation. So I asked Mark how he approached the process of bringing new people into an organization, and this is what he said.
With the many different organizations I've worked with, even before I got into Agile, I've been in management roles, I've been in director roles where I've had the responsibility of not only hiring but bringing people in. But even when I wasn't in those roles, I always cared about, do people have the right introduction to the organization? Do they know where they fit? Do they know what the organization is about? So they can jump in and be productive, because that's what I always wanted. I wanted to know, okay, how can I help out? I'm hired on. How can I help this organization move forward? So I've always tried to provide that for others.
And how have you done that? Or what are,
yeah.
And of course, it'd be great to hear also stuff that you've dropped from over the last years while doing that, and then stuff that you've really embraced also.
Yeah. So early in my career, especially when I was in managerial roles, I was always very concerned with asking the right questions and would have a strict script that I would follow. And that was one of the things I dropped because I found out it was more important just to have a conversation, get to know the person. And now there's certainly certain things that you want to know, both in the interview process and the onboarding, but it's just getting to know the person to see, do you have a sense of what are their preferences, especially around work, and how can they let their teammates know? How can they better plug in as part of that? The other big aha, and why I keep mentioning interviewing, is I realized early on that the onboarding, or what I like to call more the integration process, kind of getting them integrated in the organization, really starts at the interview. So getting people involved in the company, even during the interview, showing them that you're excited about why you're with the organization, making it clear that you understand the vision and the mission of the organization and where you could see them joining in as part of that. So that was one of the first things I started doing early on, is getting rid of the script and really just having conversation, figuring out, what are their preferences, where are their passions, because where they got hired into may not end up being the place that they go, because they could end up having a much better fit elsewhere. So also not being too tied to where they're at now. If you talk to the new employee and realize, hey, they've got some capabilities in other areas, let's talk about how you first get settled where you're at, and then talk about those other possibilities. So that onboarding process should also include not only introducing the new person to their immediate teammates, but key parts of the organization, just so they know who are other people I might reach out to find out about certain parts of the business, or just connect with others that might help me in my current role. So connecting is a big part of what I do, is integrating a new person into an organization.
So I just want to highlight the word that you use in integrating, which is something I read in your book, From Chaos to Successful Distributed Agile Teams. Much nicer.
Yeah. So when Johanna and I talked about onboarding, we had an interesting discussion about that word and the word resources, which is often used with people and organizations. So I'm not a big fan of the word resource, because people are not inanimate objects. Mm-hmm. They don't just plug in places. And the word onboarding kind of gives that sense of, I'm taking a box and I'm putting it on the organization, or I'm plugging it in the organization. So I try to avoid the word onboarding and really look at how do we integrate you? How do you understand where you can contribute? And I think that change in language also helps both the new employee and the existing employees understand we need to help bring this person in. And that's actually another key shift in that integration process. It's not just one person, like a manager, bringing that new employee on board. It's really, how do you get the team to help this person get on board? Because the manager can't know everything the team's doing, especially with the many different types of knowledge workers that you and I interact with these days. There's so many things going on in our online businesses that it's hard to say that any one person knows everything. So you need the team to help integrate that new person. So to understand what's the current project or projects the team's working on, and what's some good entry points for this person to first learn about the project, but also try to get them contributing as soon as possible. Because if it takes a month, 2 months just to understand the project, that person might start to lose interest and say, I really don't feel like I'm contributing here. So getting somebody contributing is another key thing that I think helps in that integration process.
You segued so beautifully into that, because that's exactly what I was going to ask you about.
Okay, good.
The role of the team in integrating the new person. And I think also that the nuance between the word onboarding and integrating is very powerful. And I think I'm going to start talking about that. And we might even title the episode, use that word in the title, because onboard really has this sense that someone is coming and not superficially, but it's just joining at like a flat surface, whereas integration really, it really allows me to think about an organization encapsulating that person and really welcoming them, wrapping themselves around it. Whereas onboarding is a little bit like, you come here and you're going to be a little bit on your own.
Yeah.
So,
it's the difference between, is it an event or is it a process? And it's really more of a process. And like any knowledge work these days, it requires your whole team to do that.
Wonderful. So how or what have you seen, or how do you enable the team members to help with the integration process? And also, how are you doing that in a distributed organization? I do want to come back to your role as connector later, but talking about the team, so what happens during that period of integration with the team?
Yeah. So I actually might bring in the connector part in this part as well, but it helps if the new employee has not just one, but maybe a couple of people to help initially bring them in. So usually in the teams I work with these days, there's a manager that will reach out with the hello email. Here's what you should expect on your first day. Here's how we're going to connect, and just kind of set expectations for the day about how they need to connect online so they actually can meet the rest of the team. As part of that, usually there's a face-to-face conversation, and so we try to get that new person in a video chat as soon as they are able to connect. And that makes them feel more comfortable that, okay, I am talking to a real person. I am in a real company. There's a face here. But then later on, especially with the Agile teams I work with, there's usually a short daily meeting where the team is checking in with each other, that idea of a daily stand-up meeting. And so not long after that, you get to meet the entire team on video. So you've met the manager or whoever's being, sometimes we refer to that as the Sherpa or the guide, bringing that person into the team. But now you're meeting the whole team and they're introducing the new person to the entire team and using some of that time for that new person to give a little bit of their background, but also to give a little bit of background of the team members. And with that, there could be a little bit of organization or in planning in that very first stand-up where the person in that Sherpa role would say, it'd be great if somebody, let's say it's Mary that comes in, if somebody could show Mary how we set up for our project. So what are some of the key tools that Mary needs to know? You don't have to go through every detail, but just kind of show her what's some of the key day-to-day things. And it might be one or two team members say, oh yeah, I can do it right after this call. And so the idea is getting team members involved right away. The other thing that we encourage, and this goes on the list or backlog of items for integration for a new team member, is ask for help in a team chat channel. Because what happens is somebody comes in new, they'll connect with that first person that brought them in, that Sherpa, but then they may be a little bit shy and they may not feel comfortable reaching out. What I tell that new person is ask the question in the team's chat channel, because I would say 80 to 90% of the time, you're going to help out the team because you're going to ask a question. You might think it's a dumb question, but what will happen is the team will come back with 3, 4, 5 different answers, and then you'll see the team members go, oh, I didn't know you could do that. Oh, that's cool. And so they start to kind of recalibrate on their knowledge. They say, oh, wow, I didn't know there was a shortcut to do that. And so now the new team member has flushed out some new information, not only for them, but for the team. And we encourage the team member to say, hey, in the team's documentation space, why don't you capture that knowledge so everybody has it handy? So now they connected with the team, they've uncovered new knowledge, and now they've saved that knowledge in the team's, whatever the document repository is.
I'm hearing some wonderful words, recalibrate. Not just specifically around this one question that someone might be asking. And I think it's such a great context to give the new person, whatever you do here, do it publicly. Someone else is going to benefit. So that's one thing that helps them get there. But I think also, of course, when one person joins the team, that is in effect a new team. And I'm also wondering what starts to happen. I don't know if you've observed anything about when that person starts to really integrate, or at the beginning stages of that integration, how teams recalibrate around it, or what kind of things happen, or I don't know. This I'm not sure what the question is.
Yeah, well, I think I can help with that.
Great.
So you're absolutely right. Anytime you add or remove a team member from a team, you have a new team. And so it's understanding how do the dynamics of that team change. And it's better if you are in that manager role, that leader role, that coach role. It's good for you to be proactive and explore that with the team sooner rather than later. So where I'm at now, we do this all the time. Sometimes we'll reshuffle teams because there's maybe a new set of initiatives coming up for the quarter, and we'll put people together. They worked together before, but some of the team members are new to each other. And it's a matter of getting to know each other, but again, getting to know their work preferences. And there's many different ways you can do this. I mean, certainly you can do something elaborate like Myers-Briggs or a DISC assessment, which I find as much as I love those, most people don't know how to navigate the information. I'm actually more of a strength finder fan myself, but I find that if you keep it simple, and we have one activity in the book, actually two. There's two in the book. One is the compass activity. So in this activity, if everyone got co-located for a short period of time, you could run it in a room together, or you can run it online in Zoom, or whatever tool you have in any shared document. But in the compass activity, you basically have a compass on the screen, north, south, east, and west. And as the facilitator, you might grab the avatars out of the chat tool or the email tool, but whatever that people use to represent themselves, because that's how they're going to recognize each other in this exercise. And so you put those avatars off to the side and you explain, okay, in a minute, I want you to move your avatar to the compass direction that makes the most sense to you, or that you tend to move toward the most often. So north would be, I like to jump into action. Whatever it is we have to do, I just want to get started. South is, I really want to hear everybody's input before we move on this. East is, I've got to really understand the big picture before I feel comfortable with the team moving forward. And west is, I need all the details. I need the who, the what, the why. I need all of it before I feel comfortable with the team moving forward on this project. So quickly, people will move their avatars, or if you're together in a room, you could put the compass on the floor and people can just move themselves around. And then you just ask them to notice who's where, and what does this tell you about how we might need to work together as a team. So in the book, we have some further debrief questions, but it's really about noticing who has what preferences. They've just very easily shown how they like to move. And oh, now that I see that Tom is in the north, I see why he gets so upset when we're sitting here debating how to move forward on something, because he wants to go. He wants to move forward. So that's one activity. There's another one that we share. Is actually from another coach named Deval Panchal, and it's called the Sharing Values activity. It's a similar kind of activity where people express their preferences, and I'll leave it to the listeners to go explore that one for now.
Good, get them in there, get them in the book, From Chaos to Successful Distributed Agile Teams. I thoroughly recommend it, listeners. Thank you for that. That is, I love that. I love the just not leaving it to think about integrating one new person, but actually finding the opportunity to recalibrate, and also imagining, I mean, this might not always be the case, but if there are new people joining that team or joining that organization, to go through this exercise with everyone else, that's already such a welcoming part of the process. So I really like that. Very nice. Anything else you want to say about your role as connector? Or what else happens in addition to these more visible steps in the process?
The question that Johanna and I always get is, okay, so how does this work for larger organizations, teams of teams, for instance? Well, if you start establishing those habits early on of asking questions in public channels, reaching out to other people, you've now sort of built an organizational muscle around reaching out to each other. That's probably one of the most important things for you to establish very early on with every person that comes into your organization, is getting into that habit of reaching out. Because now when you have multiple teams that have to collaborate, how do you get those teams to reach out to each other? How do you get them to collaborate together on a particular initiative? And it's the same kind of idea. It's just now it's at a team level. And so as a coach or connector, I look at what kind of opportunities do teams have to make those connections. So the teams I have now, they usually have a dedicated team channel, but when they're collaborating with other teams, they might set up a separate channel sometimes and realize, okay, this is a different channel we have to pay attention to because we have a whole other group of people now, another team that's depending on us. So we need to not only pay attention to our work, but we need to pay attention when there's requests, and we need to ask in that open channel for help as soon as we need it, and not try to wrestle with a problem ourselves if we know our other team can maybe answer that question more quickly for us. So it's establishing that habit of reaching out and connecting. And do you have not only people in the organization to do that, but do you have people that coach others to do that?
In an organization with a collaborative culture, this kind of integration process is almost ongoing, but it just takes different levels.
Yes. And so when you're in that connector role, when you're not seeing that connection happen, that's where you might have to go to each group or each team, and you might say something like, "Oh, it's interesting that you're getting upset about this situation, because if I were outside this team, I probably wouldn't have access to all the information you have inside this team. I wonder how others perceive that." So it's just kind of asking questions about, are you communicating out to other teams to connect? Or is there something that only your team or certain individuals in your team have access to? So just kind of putting that mirror in front of the other team, so they look at, oh yeah, they're not able to see what we see as far as status of our part of the project. We need to share that out in a different way for them.
And what do you enjoy most about bringing people into a team?
It's really about them feeling part of a community for me. So yes, there is work, there are things to be done, but if they don't feel like they're part of something larger, then they don't really tend to connect well online. If they feel like people will miss me if I'm not here, for instance, if they feel that sense of community, then they will take the extra effort to say, hey, I'm going to be out for an hour, I have a doctor's appointment, or hey, I just lost power, bear with me while I try to find a new location. And, even you and I have had to deal with that in some of our conversations. But because we had that connection, we had that shared community through virtual team talk, we know, hey, let's give that person the benefit of the doubt. Let's not just assume they're silent because they're ignoring us. There might be something else going on. They're part of the community. They respect the work of the community. And how do we make sure they stay connected? So it's at building those community connections within the workplace that I think are really what I find the most enjoyable.
And listeners, if you want to hear more from Mark, well, where do I start? He's contributed to episode 200, where we talked about celebrations. And he also shared his writing journey in episode 197, how him and co-author Johanna Rothman used Agile principles to write a book about Agile, distributed Agile. And you can also listen to him in episode 73, 95, 175, talking about hybrid meetings, online co-working, and open space. And of course, Maya Middlemiss, my colleague who looks after the show notes, will stick maybe not links to the episodes, but at least she'll write them down. And Mark has taken us to the end of today's episode. Thank you very much to all three contributors, Marcus Vermuth, Mandy Garner, and Mark Kilby. And of course, I'm thanking Ross Winter in advance for putting the episode together. And I'm thanking Maya Middlemiss for creating the show notes. Listeners, remember that you can access the summary show notes by clicking on your episode artwork or expanding on the details. And for the full-on show notes, which almost read like a blog post, almost without the almost, and they have pictures of our guests, you can go to virtualnotdistant.com and look for the podcast page. I would tell you what the number of this episode is, but I am not sure because I still haven't decided whether we're going to be releasing some other stuff before it, in between the last 2019 episode and this one. Finally, I would love to hear from you. You can email me, pilar@virtualnotdistant.com, or you can tweet at me at Pilar Orti. And you can also follow the company's handle, which is actually run by Maya, at Virtual Teamwork, with the O in work as a 0. If you have any thoughts on today's episode, or you have a big question about the world of remote collaboration or leadership, we have an episode coming up tackling big questions with no answers. So we would love to have your questions on it too. Thank you for listening. I'll leave you with me reading the stock outro. See ya. A big thank you for listening to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast produced by Virtual Not Distant. If you have something to add to the conversation, let us know through the contact form over at virtualnotdistant.com. I have been your host, Pilar Orti, and I'm signing off now. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy.